Hi folks, this is another Florida Man Diplomacy Talleyrand video, and what follows is the Turkish postmortem.
Yeah, I kind of wrote down some notes on things that I thought, kind of going through primarily my mistakes and some things that I thought ended up going well, and then also looking at some of the other countries and thinking about what I thought their mistakes and successes were, and then some of the takeaways from the game. So going through, first talking about my mistakes. So I think a big one here is I moved to Armenia, and in general, I like this opening. I think that Smyrna, you end up doing very little with it if you move to Constantinople, unless you have a really strong Russian ally. And in general, as Turkey, I would much prefer to have any ally besides Russia. I think the Black Sea is just too much of a contest that it makes it really hard for me to at least to trust most Russian players. So that's kind of my default is Smyrna to Armenia. And I do also like the Smyrna to Syria in general, but either way, so I'd put in those default orders, and I from the negotiations, I kind of thought that Russia and Italy seemed a bit more trustworthy than Austria, because I'd sent some long messages to Austria and they had responded with some very short messages. And so I had kind of thought about changing them, but then the adjudication happened a bit earlier than I was expecting. And I think, honestly, I may have, even though I had those thoughts, I hadn't really had them strong enough to really decide to change from my default. So I think that was a mistake here. It turns out in the end, it made both Italy and Russia really not trust me through most of this game. And so it made it much, much harder for me to survive. So, I mean, that's a bit results oriented, that not everyone will think that way. But certainly I think here, given the conversations that I'd had with players at the time, I had a subconscious suspicion that moving to Armenia wouldn't be a good idea, and I didn't act on that. And I think in general, those sorts of subconscious thoughts are ones that you usually should act on. I think that was a big mistake and definitely made it harder for me throughout the game.
I think moving to Armenia consistently ticks off Russia pretty much every time. So
of course.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting Russia to not be annoyed at this.
The only thing you only do if you have a solid alliance with Austria, I would say.
I don't know, because I think lots of Russian players, or lots of diplomacy players in general, can be flexible and willing to trust somebody if they can later demonstrate that trust. And so if you see the moves in the next couple turns, I made sure to do exactly as I told Russia to do in order to build trust, because I thought that Russia would be a better ally than Austria at that point. And so I think that many diplomacy players would see those orders, and I also told Italy all the same stuff, so that Italy could also feel that I was more trustworthy, and to try to build trust back with both of them. And I think that many diplomacy players would recognize that as being, actions speak louder than words here, and many people are willing to kind of forgive first moves as, oh, we don't really know what's going on necessarily, and you're just kind of testing the waters. But it then also gives me the option to have a strong early alliance with Austria, right? Like, it gives me those options.
It's an interesting point. I will say that as for forgiving 1901 moves, Austria made a 1901 move with Trieste to Venice, and Italy never forgave him and ended up...
Yes, I will talk about that later. I think that was problematic for a couple other reasons from my perspective on the board. So I think that was definitely a mistake on my part. And, again, at least from my perspective, I don't think it was a mistake in terms of that the move set in general is a mistake, but in that the diplomatic situation, both at the time and later, made it clear to me that I misjudged the players and what they would think of the move, and that cost me diplomatic troubles in the future. Moving forward to 1903, actually.
Okay.
So 1903, I think there are a couple of failures here, primarily in these spring moves. Starting with the Mediterranean, I knew that Italy was going to attack me here, because at this point, Russia had built a fleet, and I figured that since Italy decided not to move against France, there was the only logical conclusion is that they were going to attack me. And I had assumed that they would try to move into the Eastern Mediterranean to get the convoy into Syria, because I had no armies around, and I figured that was probably the sort of most obvious move. And at this point, I hadn't realized the strengths of the Italian player. And so I figured I'll just try to counter the most obvious move and assume that that's the one that Italy will make. And I think I really underestimated Italy here in moving this way. And I would have been able to delay and protect myself with significantly less trouble if I had blocked Italy getting into the Aegean Sea here. And so it was a guessing game. But I think that with these guessing games, you can often figure out what a player is going to do by thinking through their psychology. And I think what my mistake was here is not that I missed a 50-50, it's that I underestimated Italy strategically. I should have figured out that Italy was a good enough player that they would move to a GNC rather than Eastern Mediterranean. Right. And I think that's a mistake rather than just a bad luck.
Okay, possibly.
I mean, it's certainly a bit of both, but I think it's good to call it out for what it is. The other mistake is that I didn't convince Austria to support me, or I don't remember exactly. I think I planned to support Austria from Serbia into Romania. I had told Austria that I'd support them into Romania. I don't remember if it was from Serbia or Budapest, but somehow I didn't convince Austria to do that, and instead they essentially made entirely hold moves, which required me to instead support myself into Romania. I knew that I would get this fleet kicked out of Romania the next turn, but I had decided at the time that this would be a good way of slowing Russia down a bit. I think it did a good job at that, but it was still way less optimal than getting Austria into Romania, which Austria totally wouldn't have been able to keep either, but at least then I could have kept that fleet in the Black Sea to do some other things. So that was kind of a problem there. And I don't know why Austria didn't accept that.
I think Austria recognized that he was doomed, but I don't know why it seems like he basically almost stopped playing for a little bit.
Yeah, but the weird thing is that Austria does accept French support into Munich. And maybe that was just serendipitous. Austria just put in a move without talking to anyone, and France just supported it, assuming that it would happen, and it worked out. Maybe, I don't know the negotiations.
No, they discussed it.
But
I'm telling you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So they did discuss it, evidently, and it just seems weird that Austria would give up here, but then not give up another few turns, which indicates to me that I did something wrong in my negotiations with them, and that I didn't convince them that I would help them enough to make them actually consider doing it. I mean, the Austrian moves, I think everyone else on this board played decently well. I mean, I have criticisms, but I think the Austrian player just mystifies me with a lot of what they did this entire game.
It was pretty
it's no surprise that they were eliminated very quickly from my perspective. But yeah, anyways, so I think that was a mistake as well, just not figuring out how to even connect with Austria and talk to them, which I had also not been able to successfully do that in the first moves in spring of 2001. So this is not just a failure at this point, but this is a consistent diplomatic failure that I had never been able to really successfully get on board with the Austrian player.
That seems like a sort of a problem that everyone around Austria had.
Certainly.
I certainly see why you in particular would feel that you had that issue, because Austria had some discussions with Germany, some discussions with Italy, I don't know what kind of discussions with Russia, but I know Italy was ticked at Austria because Austria's move into Venice violated it. Well, it was unexpected even though they had discussed their moves. And Germany was ticked at Austria for the same reason, because I think the three of them were trying to do a central alliance. Yeah.
I'll talk more about Austria later, because I do have some thoughts on some of the things on that move to Venice. But just kind of talking about more like the mistakes that I made first.
Right.
I still think that no matter what, even if they were a particularly intractable player, there may have been some way that I could have figured out how to work with them.
I agree with you.
I still don't know what that is, but I do still think it is good to identify that as a failure, even though I don't know how to fix it.
I agree with you that every player is someone you can talk to, pretty much. There's a way to work with every player, and sometimes it is just difficult to figure out.
I mean, sadly, in the online format, sometimes there are players that literally will never respond to your messages.
Yeah.
But besides that, Austria did respond to some messages, so it was clear that they were at least paying attention to the game and reading the messages. The other thing that I think was a mistake here was actually my diplomacy with Italy. So I'd offered support into Greece in the fall of 2002 with the request that Italy moves Tunis to Western Mediterranean. They didn't do that, and which was also an indicator that they were probably going to attack me. But I think that this next year, I really pushed hard that I expected France to be going after Italy, mostly in an attempt to try to get Italy and France stuck in a war with one another.
No, that sounds like a good plan.
I think, however, that my press and how I wrote it, I was overzealous, and that made Italy just think that I was untrustworthy and just saying stuff that they correctly read that I was trying to get them into a war with France. Like they totally figured out what I was doing, and that's good on the Italian player. They did a great job this game, and I'm very congratulatory for their play and very impressed by it. But Still, I think that's also then a mistake on my part that I wasn't able to convince them that France was a threat without making it so obvious that they thought I was just doing it out of self-interest.
Yeah, I see why you'd consider that an error on your part. I think that's a fair point. It was around this time in the game where I actually thought Italy might end up soloing, because he was just. I found it kind of impressive that he was able to get him into Greece, and then he got into Aegean, and he was getting Germany into Vienna.
So actually, talking about Greece, this is actually one of the things that I put on my successes, and I think this might be very controversial for both you and anyone maybe watching this, because Italy didn't follow through with what I'd asked them to do with giving them Greece, and in addition, immediately attacked me afterwards, and I could have potentially gotten that center. Why I decided to give them Greece is because, for one thing, I still thought I needed to build back trust with Italy and Russia, and I figured that offering Greece might be a way to do that. For another thing, I felt that if Italy was going to attack me, Greece would be the first thing to fall, and so I didn't think that it would be a particular loss if I didn't get that center, and also it's always possible that Italy just wouldn't have supported me into Greece. I don't know. And so if I hadn't gotten it anyways, at least I could have potentially built trust with Italy by supporting them to Greece. And I think that maybe that was part of the reason why later in the game, Italy was willing to start working with me again, is because they realized that I was a upfront, honest player a lot of the time. And even though I was clearly working for my self-interest and conniving and all of that, they knew that also I could be trusted. Of course, one should expect that of a diplomacy player, but that they knew that they could trust me about certain important things. And that may have been a reason why they helped me to survive against France or against Russia and started working with me again, is because of that move. I don't know for certain, and it may very well be that was a subconscious consideration later in the game for them listening to me over Russia. I don't know, but I do personally think that was a good move, even though it didn't end up working out in my favor at the time.
I think you're probably right, now that you put it that way. I think that you're correct, that this is probably a thing that built in Italy's mind, the idea that you're a trustworthy player. Because I could tell from the way Italy spoke about you and Austria and Russia and France, and less so Germany, but I could tell by the way he talked about each of you that he was actually trying to gauge how trustworthy each of you were by whether you kept your word at specific times. And he was doing it more consciously than most people do. So I think it probably did pay off for you in the end.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is I realized very quickly after the spring adjudication, when I moved to Armenia, that was a very poor decision in terms of demonstrating to other people that I was a trustworthy player, because that clearly factored into both Russia and Italy's decisions. And it was pretty obvious from the press right away that it was problematic. I didn't know quite how problematic it was until later when I talked to the players more. But nevertheless, I knew that I needed to build back trust. And so Greece was one of those ways that I could actionably build back that trust with Italy and not just with Russia. Anyways, I ended up surviving, and I think that Greece may have been a factor in that. Yeah, but moving on, I think those were particularly big mistakes in this game, was kind of in the early game. Because as you see after that, I'm sort of stuck in the corner, and I do relatively well succeeding in surviving in the corner. I think a lot of that is due to predictions of Russian moves, which it seemed like Italy was on board the entire time with those predictions. We had talked about them a lot of the time, which Italy might have just been saying, oh, I leaked the orders to Turkey. I never really trusted what Italy was saying at this time, but I think we both came to the same conclusions that this is what Russia is going to do, because Russia is, I believe, a fairly new player, and so is making fairly obvious moves throughout the game, which is difficult as Russia, because Russia, I think, is one of the most strategically difficult countries to play, because you're across so many areas of the map. And I'll talk about that as well later. I think Russia deserves a bit more critique than the rest of the countries just because of the way the game ended. So I did survive super well, but really I was stuck in a corner. I didn't have much diplomatically to discuss with everyone else. I just kind of watched what was going on.
I get that.
So, then going on to where I actually had some success, going to 1906. Well, starting with spring just for a second. I talked to both Russia and Italy at this point. Russia had the previous turn made moves that I essentially wrote for them, because they were like, oh, okay, my attack isn't working with you. Now I think we need to work together. How can I build back trust? So I was like, do these moves and then I'll trust you. But I told Russia also, that I needed to build an army in Smyrna to satisfy Italy, who I made a deal with to support me into Bulgaria, and that in return I would build an army rather than a fleet. This move then, the thing that I did is I moved to Aegean Sea, which I'd actually talked about with Italy, and they were relatively comfortable with, and then moved Constantinople to Bulgaria, which I don't think I had necessarily discussed, but they didn't seem totally opposed to. But I also then moved to Ankara, which I didn't talk to Russia about, but I was able to negotiate out of this. So in the fall, I ended up getting Russia to allow me to move into Sevastopol with the promise that I'd build 2 fleets to attack Italy, because I knew that at this point Russia just wanted revenge on Italy. And so I was the more potentially direct opponent to Italy than Russia could be at this point. Their positioning was just particularly bad. So that's why I could understand that Russia would accept it. But in addition, I needed Italy to support me into Romania to be able to do so. And I wasn't sure what was going on, if that would happen or not, rather than them supporting themselves in, which they had 3 armies there. Even with, you can see Russia also supports Bulgaria to Romania here. But I wouldn't have had enough strength to take Romania if not for the Italian supports, because Italy could have supported either Galicia or Serbia or Budapest in with 2 strength, and they would have taken it. So I needed Italian support for this. And the big factor that made a difference was I made a last-minute message to them saying, hey, I want to confirm that this is the case, that this is happening. I'd made some promises about what I was going to do in terms of attacking Russia, which for the most part I followed through on, except that I also convoyed an army from Smyrna into Bulgaria. I did that because I figured at this point, if Italy was willing to support me into Romania, they would understand the strategic implications of and the need to keep me alive. And so I could negotiate myself out of that one. But at the same time, I also wanted that army there to protect against Italy not understanding those strategic implications. So,
I mean, you're mentioning that you wanted the unit in Bulgaria for what?
I wanted to have enough strength on the front with Italy such that if Italy decided that they still wanted to attack me rather than move against so there are a couple things here. There's some possibility that I actually successfully get into Romania without Italy's help if Italy decides to move somewhere else, maybe, in which case I definitely want an army there, because Italy is then not happy with me and may very well then therefore be hostile. But I figured if Italy supports me into Romania, they probably understand what's going on around the board and will then understand and be okay with my army in Bulgaria. But if Italy changes their...
Why he'd be okay with that?
Because they know that I can't actually eliminate them. And if I can't eliminate Italy, what's the point in even trying?
I mean, you could just be out to get some dots.
I believe that I had impressed upon the Italian player enough, partially with the move to Greece, that I wasn't necessarily a player who just wanted all the centers, that I was looking at board balance and things like making sure nobody solos, stuff like that. But I figured if somehow, if I did get into Sevastopol and Romania, maybe Italy would have changed their mind and said, okay, Turkey is enough of a threat at this point. They can build 2 fleets. I need to attack this Turkish player again, which I didn't think would happen, because at this point I had realized that Italy was a really strong player and was going to prevent the French solo at this point. But I wanted to just make sure. And I figured it wouldn't really cost me anything diplomatically, and it would allow me to, if I needed to, build a fleet in Smyrna, was the other kind of consideration there.
I have a question about that, about you feeling like it wouldn't cost you anything diplomatically. Do you think it cost you and Italy anything militarily?
I don't think the army if I had moved it to Armenia instead, I don't think it would have been any more effectively placed.
I mean, when I say militarily, I mean that with the next season, you see that Italy is self-bouncing in Greece, and then later on, you see him self-bouncing in Budapest. I feel as if these 2 armies on his borders are worrying.
Italy certainly distrusted me more than I think they should have. But I mean, I don't think...
Weren't those 2 armies and that fleet in the Aegean Sea kind of the source of that distrust? That didn't need to be there.
Italy certainly decided so. I was telling Italy consistently through this entire time, look, I'm here to prevent a French solo, and there's no way I can eliminate you without France winning the game. So I'm not even going to try. And they listened to me to a decent extent, but not completely. I don't think it changed. It would have. I don't think that had I moved in different ways, we would have been able to eliminate Russia before France was an actual solo threat.
I do think that's possible, honestly. I'm just going to point out where I think there were kind of wasted movements. Because
Definitely.
if your movements are different, then France's movements would quickly become different too.
Certainly.
But
yeah, definitely.
But I'm thinking that if Italy wasn't worried about those armies, then these units in Budapest and Serbia, instead of destroying Vienna, he's going to destroy Serbia. And he's not going to move away from Tyrolia to move to Vienna for some reason, because he's already going to have a unit in Vienna. He's not going to move Serbia to Greece. Ionion's not going to go to Greece. It's going to try to go toward the west, even if it has to creep along the Italian.
I wouldn't have lost Sevastopol. It is true.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I didn't see that, but yes, you're right. If you had Armenia, you would have been able to protect it.
Yeah.
So there are a few places where it would have made a little difference.
I think you're totally correct that it may have made a difference.
I think it would have slowed France down by at least maybe a year,
perhaps. But the thing is, it wasn't. I didn't see the game as slowing France down. That wasn't really what my calculus was at the time, and I don't think it would have been correct to have that be the calculus, because I don't think France should have won here. But we can get to that in a bit.
Well,
but the thing was that what I yes.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I should ask, if you were telling Italy that you're here to stop the French solo, then why wasn't slowing French advances down like the name of the game?
I wasn't really allied with Italy until these moves went through. And I think you can if you talk to Italy about it, because it seemed like Italy was very, very close to not supporting me into Romania. And I think I may very well have been eliminated in that case. So really, I didn't think I was an ally to Italy until after this move. And the thing is that I was taking a dot off of both Italy and Russia, which I'm sort of double dealing, right? And so I thought that there was a possibility here that Italy goes back to Russia and says, okay, this Turkish player is ridiculous. Let's just eliminate them. If I didn't have a unit in Bulgaria, it would have been much easier for them to do that, right?
That's a fair point.
Which again, it's hard to say what would have happened. I think you're totally right that it did cost us time.
I think in your situation it's difficult because you're not on the front line with France, so it doesn't really make sense for you to be thinking so much about what it is that's necessary to stop France. You're thinking about what it is that's necessary to keep Turkey alive. And I don't think that you're wrong for doing that. I'm just saying that Italy, I know what I understand kind of what Italy was dealing with in terms of thinking about his own defenses and he had all these considerations. I think, I mean, it's complex for different players for different reasons, but I was just saying that I think, think of it this way. If you and Italy were actually like one country, if you were one country and you could just move fluidly as if you were one country, I think ideally that's how Stop the Solo Alliance would work. If you were one country, would you have done these things? And of course the answer
certainly not. But that's the thing is, I didn't consider myself one and the same with Italy until after this move went through, because I didn't really trust Italy. If you go back to the recording, I said I think it's very unlikely that Italy actually supports me into Romania, because I didn't think this was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing is, I didn't consider myself an ally with Italy until after these moves happened.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair, and I'm sure Italy probably appreciated that you left the Aegean Sea for a little while.
Yeah, I did some random moves. It didn't really matter too much because I knew that Italy wasn't going to attack me, but I figured why not at least be sort of unpredictable.
I think that being sort of unpredictable is the kind of thing that makes Italy less efficient as a solo stopper, and that's what I'm kind of pointing out. That these are the kind of moves that I'm not sure if they actually prevented Italy from stopping the solo, because you guys basically did stop.
The thing is, it wasn't Italy's fault. The thing is, it wasn't Italy's fault that we didn't stop the solo. It was Russia's fault. Russia should have been part of that solo line. It was super easy.
Well, I mean, if you guys had if you guys had a different situation in your alliance, Italy and Turkey's alliance, then isn't it more likely you guys would have actually taken Russia out? Because
it's possible.
even right here,
I don't know if that would have happened.
In fall 1907, if it'll, I know I keep going back to this, like, these moves.
No, definitely.
If Italy didn't bounce in Budapest, which is a total waste of both of those units, and didn't move Ionian Sea to Greece, which is a loss of tempo, if he didn't make those moves, he probably doesn't lose Galicia because he could support it to hold. And
yeah, very true.
Then you guys would get into Ukraine really quickly because you'd have Galicia, Romania, Sevastopol, and Silesia. And this map looks pretty different then if you're in Ukraine, if you destroyed.
This whole time I was telling Italy, I don't think you should be worried about this, and I don't think that you can entirely fault me for Italy making those inefficient moves. I would have certainly done different as the Italian player at this point.
So I don't entirely fault you. I think it's like a combined thing, but I will say that it's two things. It's one is Italy failed to make the leap of faith to believe that you would act in a way that would facilitate him preventing the solo. And two is that you did do some things to test the faith there.
Yes, I think the thing that I didn't realize about the Italian player until the very end is that Italy is not. The Italian player is great at negotiations and great at the actual board tactics. I think probably both of those things are better than I am at, but they're not as great at reading intentions and figuring out emotions, because they certainly did a terrible job at this with Russia in the end of the game.
True.
I think this is really the only mistake that Italy can be said to have made. But I think that also led to them mistrusting me more than they should have, in that they weren't actually reading the sincerity that they probably, I believe, could have figured out. But again, yes, there's certainly some joint culpability.
You might have a point there. Seriously, I'm not sure, because I do think there were probably some crossed wires here, and
either way, I think Italy's a great player, and I don't think we can really fault Italy for making some of the moves that they did.
Yeah, I just think that I know you and Italy are both kind of ticked at Russia, and I understand that very much. I was just saying that, like, there were definitely
I can talk about that later, because I'm frustrated at Russia, but not for the same reasons that Italy is frustrated at Russia.
I was just saying that I thought there were some crossed wires, and I thought that France shouldn't have ever gotten anywhere near this close to a solo in the first place, because of the amount of advance warning you guys kind of had, and the fact that you were clearly both aware, like you were both thinking about stopping the solo. It was just that it didn't really come together.
Yeah, well, and this is one of those reasons why I wanted Italy to make a move on France way earlier than they did. Which
it might have worked. And just like you wanted France to make a move on Italy earlier than they did.
Well, the thing was if France had attacked Italy way earlier, I think that may have made France more of a solo threat, potentially.
You're right.
It may have made them less of a solo threat. I don't know, but at that time, it would have made Italy less of a threat to eliminating me, and that's all I cared about at that point. I'd rather stay alive and see someone solo, and maybe stick around to see that solo prevented, than to just be eliminated, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, Italy. If France had attacked Italy earlier on, I do think there's a good chance he would have gotten Tunis. So that would have made him.
I don't think so. I think that Italy actually had the upper hand in that, and I never expected. I think that there was like one turn where France might have been able to make an attack that would have led to them getting Tunis. But when I went back and looked through it, they had fewer opportunities than I thought they did at the time. I will say that. I think it was, let's see, it was 1905. It wasn't these moves, because it was 1905. They built so they went here, and what they did is if you go back to spring, what I thought they should do here, and I told them this, I'm fairly certain, is that they should move Spain to Gulf of Lyon this turn, so that they can support Brest into Spain. And the thing is at this point, the English Channel isn't necessary for anything, so English Channel can follow mid-Atlantic up into Spain. And then they have 3 fleets where Italy now is really badly positioned. So this was the one opportunity I think they had where they could have contested Tunis.
Interesting.
And they didn't. But I think in general, it doesn't really matter. I didn't go back through it too closely, but I think there's definitely some turns here where Italy may have been able to contest Marseille, and that might have been interesting if Italy was really trying to solo.
I think in the early game, like before pre-1905, things were very much in flux from my perspective, to the point where Italy would occasionally have units that were all the way over next to you, and France would occasionally have units that were mostly focused in the north. And so there were moments when each of them was vulnerable that if the other had decided to devote a bunch of resources, they could have done some damage.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, I think spring of 1905, France should have known that they were well on the way to getting a solo. They had, 2 fleets in the north to contest very little against Russia. They could have easily put another fleet in. And the other thing that France doesn't do, and this is what I was going to go into, I think '05 was the biggest mistake for France in general, because also they don't support themselves into Ruhr, which makes no sense because they already stabbed Germany here.
Well, I
times.
could just explain this a little bit, because I think that they were trying to sell Germany on the idea of working together again, if I recall correctly. And so,
which makes no sense. Why would Germany believe that?
Well, France allowed him to retake Munich, and France didn't move into Ruhr. In fact, France's moves are entirely benign toward Germany here, but
Sure, but why? But what does a German alliance give to France? Since Germany is literally the next country that France needs to capture. And if you see in 1906, they attacked Germany again.
Yeah, France changed his mind about it.
Yeah, I think that was just a mistake.
I think it could have worked. If he wanted to use Germany as like a cat's paw to try and take some Russian or Italian territory, maybe that could have worked. If, for instance, if he had let Germany live here, and and Germany had managed to ally with Russia, I think that probably could have gotten some Italian centers, partially by sheer surprise. And
if Germany moved against Italy, is that what you're suggesting?
If Germany allied with Russia and moved against Italy, then France is also attacking Italy in the south. I think that could have been really good, because France's major rival was Italy for most of the game.
Yeah, maybe. I just think
help.
Since France in 1905 didn't make a move on Tunis, they were very unlikely to get Tunis for the rest of the game, in which case they're racing for Warsaw. And if you're racing for Warsaw, you need to attack Germany as fast as possible. That's at least my perspective on how that worked out.
Well, I know. I think France did make a mistake, because he changed his mind without having a very clear reason why, I think. And, I think France made a mistake here because ultimately Germany wasn't going to go for it. And I think he figured out that Germany wasn't going to go for it, and that's why he changed his mind. But I do think that I think if France had gotten Germany and Russia to attack Italy, as I believe was probably his plan, or had gotten Germany to attack Russia, that might have been his plan. But in particular, if he had gotten Germany and Russia to attack Italy together, I think that probably would have been effective. And if he had weakened Italy, then he could have gotten Tunis as a result of that.
If France wanted that to have happened, they should have made some sort of group chat between all of us. Say, anti-Italy chat, coordinate with all of them. And they didn't do anything like that. So
it's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, but
which I would have expected to be included in, as Italy had just been attacking me a bunch,
Well, Italy had just supported you into Bulgaria as well at this. Well, no, that's actually at the end of fall.
Certainly.
The end of
but that's the point. Is that if 1905 they're deciding, I'm going to re-ally with Germany here, they should have done that.
That's a good point. It was not a fully baked plan.
Yeah, which I think indicates that it was just a mistake. That they were really neither playing to the 18th center of Tunis or to Warsaw, and they needed to be playing to one of those. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a mistake in that he didn't do enough to follow through with it. I think it could have been really interesting if it worked. He did actually get Germany to move against Russia again, which I thought was fun.
Yeah, no. There's certainly some success there, but at the same time, at this point, Germany, there's 3 armies on Germany. They can't defend against France, and that's why I think France should have just attacked Germany at this point. It's the kind of thing where if you can pump enough fleets through Marseille, you may have had another shot at Tunis. You never know.
Maybe.
Right.
I mean,
and with fewer centers, less likely.
With like 4 or 5 Italian fleets, I think you can kind of hold that up forever, though.
You should, but one of those fleets is in the Adriatic Sea, which is a terrible position for Italy to be in.
Well, that's true, but you see that France only has like the 2 fleets in the south right now, and he could only get 3
Well,
there at
they
most.
would have had 3 fleets if they had made the moves that I had suggested.
Well, that's true. That's a good point.
Which 3 fleets against essentially 2, right? If they had moved instead to Lyon and then in the fall supported into Spain, Mid-Atlantic into Spain with a follow-up from English Channel into Mid-Atlantic, right? They have 3 fleets there.
But
they can then support Mid-Atlantic into Western Mediterranean.
But if France moved to Lyon, Italy wouldn't have moved his fleet. He wouldn't have kept his fleet in the Adriatic. He would have moved it back out to the Ionian. And
well, but the point is that those spring moves happened at the same time.
No, I'm
so
saying,
assuming the negotiations were the same.
I'm saying that after spring moves, he would have seen that France was in Lyon, and he wouldn't after spring moves, Italy kept his Adriatic fleet in the Adriatic Sea, and he used it
yes, certainly.
So I'm saying he wouldn't have just he would have started moving his fleets west. After
but Italy has a positioning problem at this point because they moved Greece to Ionian, so they can either move Greece or Adriatic. They can't do both.
That's true. That's
right?
true.
So that's the kind of thing is I think there was maybe a chance here. I don't think it was necessarily a good chance, but I think France should have at least gone for it, right?
Maybe. I don't know. I just don't really see it as. I don't know. Maybe it could have worked. I don't think it was viable at this point. I think it had stopped being viable. Like at some point.
Yeah, but I went through the previous turns, and I didn't see a point where it would have made sense for France to actually have tried to get Tunis.
So that's why I question whether it was actually a mistake, or it's just.
I think here it was a mistake. I think given that Italy was their greatest competition, they should have at least gotten Italy stuck. Because if they had gotten Italy to move in that direction with a war, I would have much more reasonably just built a fleet in Smyrna and been able to consider starting to attack Italy, potentially, right? If France had done the negotiations, that was certainly a possibility.
Well, I mean,
at this point, I was like, okay, well, Italy's big enough that I need to still appease Italy, right? France asked me to build a fleet, but I had no reason to build a fleet, no reason to trust France either, because France had never really done what I'd asked them to do. So, I think that there were that France was slow playing 1905, and it was not the place to slow play. I think they had done some slow play in earlier turns that made sense to get Italy to kind of move back and forth, but I think 1905 was not the place to do it.
You might be right. I don't know.
I don't know. Anyways, yeah, that was my mistake from France, but yeah, let's see. Anyways, oh yeah, so the last thing that I thought I did well in this game, and this is not entirely true, but in 1911, which is the last turn of the game.
Okay.
Right here. Okay, so so the moves are the previous, right? It seems clear that Russia is throwing to France, and I've talked about this a bit, but when I talked to Russia about not throwing the solo because they deserved to end up in this draw, they came back to me individually and said, "Oh, I don't want to talk to Italy anymore, but I'm willing to accept support from Ukraine into Warsaw." I asked after the game why they would say such a thing if they didn't end up doing it, because I don't see why a player who is deciding to throw the solo would ever do something manipulative at the end of the game if they're not actually just going to prevent the solo.
I do see a reason why he would do something manipulative. It's to make sure he's successful in throwing the solo.
But the thing is that Italy and I could not stop it unless we had Russian help. There was no possible moves.
Did Russia recognize that?
Oh, okay. Maybe there was actually some just gross misunderstanding of the board situation that led Russia to make this manipulation. But after the game, what?
I said, but what's your alternative theory?
Well, after the game, I messaged Russia because the messages remain open on diplomacy for some number of days. And I said, "Hey, why'd you do this? This doesn't really make much sense to me, and I'm curious as to what the sort of decision-making was that made you decide to throw the solo anyways after we had talked so much." And they said, oh, I was asleep and I didn't realize that adjudication was going to happen, and I was considering switching my moves. Which I don't see any reason that Russia would lie about that. So maybe there's just like, they're lying after the game. They don't want me to be as annoyed at them or something, perhaps. But I think that if we assume that Russia is true, that they fell asleep, but they would have changed their orders. I can actually probably pull up the message that they sent. What did Russia say? Russia said, I was going back and forth on deciding what to do. Then I took a nap, and it took longer than I intended. When I woke up, I thought I had changed the orders to attack Warsaw the last time. I changed them, but apparently not. Anywho, suffice to say, I was okay with this outcome at this point. So I think the biggest problem here was that Russia at this point just didn't care about the game, not necessarily that they were trying to throw a solo. But either way, I think it was, to a degree, a success of what I said to Russia, that they're at least willing to consider changing their mind, because most players aren't even willing to consider changing their mind when they're throwing a solo. So, going back to some of the stuff that I talked about in the 1911 adjudication about the emotional manipulations there, I think are important and I think that was, I can count that as a success, even though it wasn't actually successful because of the buzzer, essentially. So I think that's kind of my personal mistakes and failures. I think, going through the other players quickly here. Austria, I think, I can't really say that there are any successes for Austria, but there was a very extreme failure in their move from Trieste to Venice in the first turn. This is not an unheard of starting move. I think this is called the hedgehog or something like that, with the expectation that Italy either holds or moves to Trieste, or Italy does the exact moves that they did and supports themselves into back into Venice, so that Austria can disband that fleet, which is something that I think actually did happen.
Yes.
But that only should happen if Austria talks to Italy about doing it first.
Certainly, ideally, unless Austria didn't think Italy was an ally. But in this game, Italy was clearly trying to be an ally.
And from what Italy says, Austria never told them that they were moving to Venice, and I have no reason to disbelieve that. And I think this is just an important thing, that don't do moves like that without permission. Just like if Austria is moving Trieste to Albania, I don't think it's smart for Italy to move Venice to Trieste unless they get permission. And there are lots of cases where getting that permission is great, and they should do it, and that can set up for a great Italian-Austrian alliance. But if you do it without permission, you've just screwed the both of you guys.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
and Italy and Austria are
maybe that's a bit hypocritical.
Already.
Maybe that's a bit hypocritical with my move from Smyrna to Armenia, but I think there are a couple different differences there in terms of just where Austria is placed on the map versus where Turkey is placed, and some of the way that Austria played afterwards, which, Austria could have done things in that situation that may have been able to repair their relationship, but it didn't seem like they did any of those things either. So, yeah. Anyways, moving on to England, I think their mistake was in the fall. So they moved to English Channel in the spring. When I talked to both France and England, neither of them said it was an arranged bounce, which makes me believe that it was actually an accidental or an unintentional bounce.
Yeah.
In which case, you have just made a commitment as England that you are likely attacking France. And I think as England, that also signals to Germany that that's something that's your plan for the future, and you should start setting up that attack. And if you start moving in a different direction, then it'll look to both France and Germany like you're not trustworthy, because then you're just making random decisions on the map and you're not sticking to a consistent plan. And what England does is not only not move to the English Channel again, they convoy their army to Norway, which also should reasonably annoy Russia, because now there's an army sitting next to St. Petersburg. So not only have you given both Germany and France reasons to distrust you, you've also given Russia a reason to distrust you. So I think this was a terrible move. And also, not only that, but now your army is stuck in Norway, where you really need it in Picardy or in Belgium. And
right.
so I think that...
I think.
It's not surprising that Austria and England were the two players eliminated very early. I actually had tried at one point to get Germany to start working with England again after it was clear that France was going to get the majority of the English centers. Germany ended up not taking that offer. I think that was, again, a bit of a diplomatic failure on my part, which ended up resulting in Germany dying as well. I think that's what I said was, I had a different mistake for Germany. But I think that was also a factor there, is that Germany just didn't really feel like they could trust England because England had never shown really any sort of trustworthiness to Germany in any actionable way, besides not attacking them, I guess. But that's not really trust. That's just not aggression. So anyways, I think that was the big mistake for England. Again, no real successes that I could see there. But they seemed like a nice player from when I had talked to them a couple times, and I think that they could have made alliances. They seemed like a kind of player that could have easily done well in this game had they not made some mistakes on the board. So a bit unfortunate there. Yeah, actually going to Germany now, because they're the next one that got eliminated.
Yeah.
I think Germany's actually biggest mistake, besides not helping England to stay alive once it was clear that France was going to get Liverpool and London and likely Edinburgh, I think Germany's mistake was actually not bouncing Sweden in the first move.
Interesting. And
I think the reason for this is that, as Germany, I think that Belgium is a German center. I think if you're in a French-German alliance, France should not have Belgium, or else France is going to do exactly what they did here and take Liverpool and London, and maybe they'll support you in Edinburgh, but it doesn't matter because they'll just take Edinburgh for themselves. And then they'll get into the North Sea, and then you're screwed. And so I think what you need to do as Germany, if you want to work with France, is firstly make sure that France lets you take Belgium. Let them move into Burgundy. Who knows? But I think you need Belgium. And if they're not willing to give you Belgium, then you need to make sure that England has a place to grow, which means that you need to prevent Russia from getting too big, which is why I think that you should bounce Sweden there, because Russia normally isn't going to go and attack you if you bounce Sweden, but it maybe gives England a bit more breathing room so that they're not going to get completely destroyed by France immediately.
You have a good point there, I think.
Yeah, which I think goes to one of my big takeaways in this game, is that first moves matter a lot. And I think for a lot of my diplomacy playing history, I haven't thought of first moves as being that important, and kind of like, oh, we'll see what happens in the first moves, and then after that we'll talk. Actually, when I was first starting to play diplomacy online, I thought it was a good idea to just not really talk to players the first turn, see how first moves turned out, and then I talk to them after that and see, oh, are they like a player that's interested in working with me or not, which is totally stupid. But I think I've had this kind of conception that misconception that first turns don't matter a lot, and what matters more is what happens afterwards, which to a degree is true, that you can demonstrate that you are more trustworthy than it seemed in your first moves or whatever. But ultimately, I think as this game shows, there are lots of mistakes that happen in the first move that really showed how the rest of the game progressed. So that's kind of one of my really important takeaways from this game as a player. And really make sure to get those first moves as right as you can, and figure out what the players around you are going to think of them, because otherwise you could just be eliminated really quickly. And I was very close to being eliminated. I'm not going to make any pretend at all that in an alternate universe I might have just been eliminated.
In one of the alternate universes, maybe Russia soloed, so there's a lot of other ways.
I don't. Yeah, who knows? But either way, I think
you didn't.
What?
I said, but you didn't get eliminated, though. You didn't. So
I didn't get eliminated, but that took a lot of effort on my part. And
you were clinging to the cliff's edge for a long time.
Exactly. And I think a large part of that was due to that move to Armenia. And so I think it is really safe to say that first moves matter a lot, and those can really tell the rest of the board what you're thinking and who you are as a player in terms of your trustworthiness and things like this. And so messing those up can really mean that you get eliminated early, which I think is one of the detriments to diplomacy as a hobby, is that it makes it very high barrier to entry because it's easy to make mistakes and then just get eliminated, and that feels really bad. But once you kind of learn some of those things and don't make those mistakes, then it's really cool to see how the first moves can affect the board.
I think that it's in that way it's a little bit like chess. If you make bad opening moves in chess, you can get eliminated in like 5 turns. you can lose the
True.
game because it's like a small target. Your king. It's easy to get it quickly if the person who you're playing knows what they're doing and you don't. But I do think that it makes it interesting because every season in some ways is like a dance. You see who's going to do what and what configurations things are going to end up in. It's very interesting, and
I think Diplomacy with a Standard Map is one of the greatest games ever created. But yeah, one of those really crazy interesting things is those first moves. And I think for a lot of my Diplomacy playing career, I've discounted them as being less important than they are. And I think some of the players on this board may have as well. Anyways, yeah, so moving on, I talked about France. I think that, just their mistakes in the 1905 moves. I think even if I don't think France deserved a solo here, I think they really still deserve credit for their emotional manipulation of Russia into giving them that solo, which it's still impressive, regardless of if I think they deserved it or not. So I think that's definitely a success on the part of the French player. And in general, they seem to have been very good at convincing people not to attack them the entire game. England, Germany, Italy. I don't think that France deserved the solo, and I don't think that they should let that inflate their ego in any way. But that said, I think that France is still a good player and did a lot of good things in this game, especially with the way that they negotiated. I think, going back to Germany, I think one thing that they did really well is getting an army into Vienna, which I don't think should ever happen as Germany. I don't really understand why. Italy and Russia both agreed to support them into Vienna, but it happened, and I think that they survived a lot longer than they would have otherwise if they hadn't gotten that army into Vienna.
Really?
So I think that was a very, very, very strong diplomatic success on the part of the Germans, because if I were Italy or Russia here, I would never have taken that offer, right? I would have said, oh yeah, Germany, totally, I'm going to do that, but then talk to Russia and say, oh, I'll support you into Vienna, or vice versa, right?
So I think as Italy, it might make sense. As Italy, it might make sense because that center would probably otherwise go to Russia. And if Italy is trying to create a weak Russia, then it makes sense to make Germany stronger and give a center that should be Russian to Germany. I don't think it makes any sense for Russia, though.
Very true. But either way, still, the point being that figuring that out and moving to Bohemia and then to Vienna was very solid, diplomatically and board-wise.
I think it was some solid diplomacy. Tactically, as Germany in the early game, I would never want to attack Austria or get Austrian centers, because if either Russia or Italy comes after him, it's pretty much impossible for him to hold it. But he wasn't being attacked by Italy or Russia. I don't think it really helped him, because he just got an extra unit, but he was using unit to hold Vienna the whole time, pretty much. So it was really kind of a waste. It wasn't a waste, but
maybe
all the moves that were required to get Vienna were kind of wasted up until this point in winter 1904, when he finally destroys the army that's holding Vienna for him. After that point, the Vienna center is actually providing him a benefit. But before that, it was just kind of a unit that could have been, a unit that for a year or so, it was a unit that could have been elsewhere, and then it was just like a useless unit.
All right, so maybe not a tactical success, but certainly a diplomatic success.
Very impressive diplomatic success, I would say, because as you're right, as Italy or Russia, I probably would not have let Germany have that.
Yeah, but I think you also make a good point that as Italy, I may have actually gone for that because I want to subtly diminish France's power without directly attacking France, and that's one way to kind of do that. So I can kind of see. I think you make a good point that as Italy, that might be a good move, which I wasn't thinking about at first. But yeah, as Russia, no way.
I mean, if Italy had played the conflict between France and Germany really well, then he could have kept it going for years and years longer than it was. And maybe even made Germany his Janissary on the way to a solo. I don't know. But
there were lots of things that Italy could have done. I don't know if they were necessarily mistakes, which is why I don't consider any of those things mistakes. Maybe Italy could have gone for a solo here, but I think that it would have been very difficult given the situation in the East.
I think the way that things kept unfolding kept making it difficult for Italy to take advantage of the opportunities that I thought he had earlier on. I mean, so I don't know if he made mistakes or where those mistakes would have been. I think Italy played a solid game.
Oh, completely agreed. I think it's up to Italy to decide what moves were mistakes on their part, because they know their diplomatic situation each turn.
Yeah, and I was just saying that I think like maybe that was like a vision he might have had or could have had for Germany, and maybe a reason for him to give Vienna to Germany, as you were.
No, I think it's a very, very good point that I wasn't thinking of before. Speaking of Italy, I think that their negotiations, their tactics were really great throughout the game. I think really the only mistake that I think they made was not remaining on good terms with Russia after they stabbed Russia, which I think was one of the main contributing factors to why, in the end, we did end up losing the game and not drawing the game.
I'm going to be honest. I think that stabbing Russia at all was a mistake. I think that Italy, and I've heard this from him like a few times, and so I believe it's true. Italy perceived that Russia was likely to stab him, and so he stabbed Russia. And I just don't see how that was going to happen. And I think that when you stab someone, you want to be able to kill them quickly after that. And he was not going to be able to do that to Russia. And at the same time, very shortly after, he's getting into a fight with France. So he essentially got himself into a two-front war, which is like, I mean, Italy played it as well as he possibly could have, but he created a very strategically difficult situation for himself by doing that.
I think that Italy made a good decision in stabbing Russia in the sense that they recognized that Russia was a fairly emotionally unstable player and didn't feel like they were a particularly good ally. But at the same time, I think you could argue that they made a mistake, because Russia was clearly a player who would kind of just stick to one ally and do that for most of the game, and so probably wouldn't have tried to eliminate Italy. But in general, France and Russia, if I'm not mistaken, can get into two-way draw sort of situation. And Russia, with two fleets in the south, could maybe start working towards that, potentially. Yeah. So I can understand Italy's fears about Russia.
Italy, I think what made Italy worried was the fact that Russia built an army in St. Pete here. And Italy tried to persuade him to build a fleet in St. Pete, which I think...
I have some strong words about the Russian builds here.
I'm sure I probably agree with your thoughts that Russia should have built a fleet in St. Pete, and that would have been much better for fighting off France. And but that was what made the fact that Russia did that was what made Italy, was the main thing I think that made Italy feel a stab was imminent.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah,
I think that I understand why Italy was annoyed about not getting a fleet in St. Pete. I don't think Russia thought that he was going to stab Italy. And I think that, frankly, Italy would have had a much easier time finishing you off than he was going to have finishing Russia off, because you only had the 3 centers,
definitely.
And Russia had 8.
Definitely. It's just once you finish me off, then there's no limit to France moving their fleets into the Mediterranean. And that's extremely worrying for Italy.
Well, you're not imposing a limit on France moving fleets into the Mediterranean. Italy.
No, sorry, Russia moving fleets into the Mediterranean.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Sorry,
I think that ideally Italy would arrange for Russia to destroy one of those southern fleets, but I really don't know if I will admit I really don't know if Russia had the tactical knowledge to recognize that would have been a good thing.
I completely agree with you on that regard. And that's why I have more words to say about Russia than I do about any of the other players on this board, because I think that of anyone, Russia made some very clear beginner mistakes. And I hope that Russia can listen to some of these comments in order to improve their game in the future, because I don't think that I think Italy is of the opinion that with the throw of the solo, Russia just shouldn't play the game anymore, is I think kind of what Italy has expressed, and I don't agree with that. I think it's great to grow the hobby, and I think everyone makes these kinds of mistakes that Russia did, and so I don't think that Russia should take that advice to just not play the game anymore, because in general, they were a reasonably cool player to play with. I disagree with a lot of their moves, but they weren't like a bad player to talk to impress. They were responsive, they had good thoughts a lot of the time, and so I hope that some of these comments that I make can educate France or Russia on maybe some of the things that they should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, I'm sure that comment by Italy is just that, Italy made Russia emotional. I'm sure Russia made Italy emotional. Like they both.
Oh yeah.
They really butted heads quite hard through the last half of this game. So I'm not really all that surprised about that. But yeah.
And again, that's why I think that Italy made a mistake there. Italy could have been the better person and not gotten into that emotional battle.
And I do think that Italy tried to find some way to make up with Russia, but I don't know. I guess it was just tough after this. This was a pretty good stab. It was a very effective stab, and it reduced Russia to not having any centers in the south at all. So
no, it certainly was an effective stab, but I don't know. I think that there was a way that you could have recovered from this, and it seemed like Italy didn't do that. And I don't know what they said, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you might be right, but the way to recover the relationship might have involved giving up centers to Russia.
Yeah, perhaps. Well, yeah, I don't know necessarily, but
that's
something broke down there and resulted in a lot of emotions. And I think that you have to fault Italy as the more experienced player much more than you have to fault Russia for that.
You might be right there. I hadn't thought about it that way. Oh, sorry. Do you have other stuff about other players that you want to say?
No. So nothing. I'm good on all the other players. I think that I've said my piece on all of them. And I do want to say that I had a really fun time this game, and I was really appreciative of all the players writing lots of press. That made it a lot more fun than a lot of my other diplomacy games where players have been less responsive, and that really sucks for everyone. So. Anyways, but talking about Russia, because I do want to talk about some of these mistakes that I think Russia made. I think firstly going to 2002, in spring, Russia told me, I am comfortable with you moving to the Black Sea. I would not have moved to the Black Sea if Russia had not said so, because I was trying to build trust, and I had done literally exactly what I'd said to Russia the previous couple turns, or I guess maybe the previous turn, but still. So Russia said that they were trustworthy enough of me to move to the Black Sea. I think maybe this was just that they were wanting to trick me into then moving into Armenia the next turn, but I wouldn't have protected Armenia even if I was in Ankara still, or if I had moved to Constantinople, perhaps, with that fleet. Or if we bounced. There were lots of possibilities, but Russia told me that they would let me move to the Black Sea, and I think that was not great.
Why wasn't it great that he let you move to the Black Sea? Sorry.
Because even if I hadn't moved to the Black Sea, I still wouldn't have protected Armenia here. And it would have been one turn faster at this point for them to move further on if I wasn't in the Black Sea. But since I was able to then take Romania on that next turn because I had the Black Sea. And I think that this was a diplomatic mistake that they should have realized that I wasn't going to move there.
So I'm going to say that I think this was a mistake on multiple levels, because if you look at the spring moves, Russia really appears to be fighting Austria. And if you as Russia are fighting Austria, you just need to be friends with Turkey if you can. And you were offering to be friends with him, and your spring 1902 moves were very Russia friendly. So he should.
And I had offered. Oh yeah, the other thing is I had suggested to Russia that they support Sevastopol into Romania instead of vice versa, which is one of those things that you're talking about, the anti-Austria rather than and pro-Turkey. And I think that a large part they didn't do that because they told me that they would move that I could move to the Black Sea. But that makes no sense because they would have been a lot better off if they had an army in Ukraine rather than an army in Ukraine and a fleet in Romania rather than an army in Romania and a fleet in Sevastopol.
Better off for purposes of
attacking Austria.
Oh, I don't think so. Really?
Usually putting a fleet in Romania is a pro-Turkey move, I feel like.
No. I'm sorry. I don't agree with that at all. I think that's like the opposite of true. I think putting a fleet...
Oh, yeah, I guess that's fair. Yeah, no, you're right.
I mean, like, there are circumstances where it could be seen as a pro-Turkey move. Maybe, I'm not real sure. But in 1901, 1902, I think putting a fleet in Romania is pretty... that's why I was saying that I thought his moves were pro-Turkish, anti-Austrian, because he's going for Romania with an army. He's going... and Austria is trying to kick him out of Galicia. Takes it back.
Yeah, that's fair.
But he decided, and I was kind of aware of this when I was talking with him, he decided basically he was going to try and fight both of you at once.
Which, honestly, he doesn't do that bad a job at, because Austria is relatively incompetent and Italy is a good ally.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
Either way, I think that it was, if nothing else, at least a a diplomatic miscalculation that I wouldn't have moved to Black Sea unless they'd asked me to, and that would have just saved them effort if they were trying to stab me anyways.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I do think that Russia made a mistake in trying to fight both of you, because even though he has a good ally in Italy, we see that Italy is getting most of the gains, so far all of the gains from the fight, and that continues on for the entire rest of the fight with Austria until Austria is eliminated.
Oh,
yeah. And he also doesn't ever get any Turkish centers. So Russia declared war on both of his neighbors, and he did not gain a single center from it.
Yeah. No, and Russia could have probably set me up for being able to get stabbed much worse in the future, maybe.
That's true. If he was
potentially, I don't know,
shaped out of that Armenia thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I do think probably after he saw your fall move away from Armenia, that maybe he should have chilled out about that a little.
Yeah. I can understand the distrust about the Armenia thing. I think asking about the Black Sea was definitely not the best. So I think that the next mistake that Russia makes is immediately after this. They move to Armenia, and they build a fleet.
All right.
Another reason why I think that asking me to move in the Black Sea is a problem is that now if you want to stab me, you have to have 2 fleets. And the problem is, if you're working with Italy isn't going to want Turkey to get eliminated if Russia has 2 fleets, because the only thing that Russia can do with those 2 units afterwards is start attacking the Mediterranean, which is a great plan if you're trying to go for solo as Russia. You can start setting up this Mediterranean thing where you shuttle fleets through the Black Sea and then through Constantinople, through Aegean, and you can, maybe conquer Italy this way. But that's not what you want to tell Italy by building another fleet. So I think this was a mistake, that if Russia really wanted to pull off a stab here, they may have actually wanted to, as you're saying, move Sevastopol to Romania so they could build an army there.
Because but
yeah,
if they move Sevastopol to Romania, how are they going to get the Black Sea, or how are they going to attack you? I guess that's what I'm wondering, because if they built an army in Sevastopol, that can move through Armenia, but you could bounce that. And I guess it just depends on whether or not you see his attack coming then. With a fleet in Sevastopol, he should be able to make some headway against you. Or with a fleet in Armenia and a fleet in Sevastopol, I mean.
I guess the problem that I see is that Italy is making gains fast enough that Italy is really going to be determining whether or not Russia ends up finishing me off, as we do see ends up happening. And when you build 2 fleets in the south, you provide Italy a strong incentive to make sure that I don't die. Maybe you provide Italy a strong incentive to keep me alive on one center in Constantinople, but you make sure that Russia can't finish me off, is what happens when you build 2 fleets, and Italy's a savvy enough player to realize that that's the case. And gives Turkey a lot more diplomatic capability of saying, Italy, help me out. Look at what's going to happen here if you let me die.
That's a fair point.
I think this is one of those cases where it seems obvious to build the fleet there. Oh, you can support yourself in the Black Sea. I can't do anything about it. And now you can start to attack Turkey. But as a more experienced player, I think you can understand that the board balance says that this is actually counterintuitively not a great move.
I do think that it's solving a tactical problem and potentially creating a strategic one.
Sure. I think that's an excellent way of putting that.
If you're a better player, you'd also be thinking, maybe I can destroy that fleet later, or maybe maybe you'd be allied with Austria if you're attacking Turkey, and then the fleet wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the thing. If you're working with Austria, getting 2 fleets is great, because Austria and France and Russia both have this problem of their ports aren't in great places. And so if both of them can build fleets at the same time, that's great for both of them. But that's not the case when you're working with Italy.
Yeah, that's true. So it is something that a reasonable Italian might be concerned about. And I don't know if this Italy was concerned about it. I don't think he ever expressed it to me, but it might have been influencing his thinking about Russia and Turkey and whether or not to...
I definitely included that in my press. So I don't know if that was a conscious or a subconscious indicator, but clearly Italy did leak a lot of Russia's moves. Maybe that was speculation or not, I don't know. But they did tell me Russia's moves. I had expected those moves to happen anyways, but still Italy seems very clearly, at least in the press between us, that even though they were attacking me, What they were doing was just sitting there and pretending to attack me. You know?
Yeah, I get what you mean.
And I think a lot of that has to do with Russia having two fleets.
I think you might be right about that now that you mention it. Are there any other Russian mistakes you wanted to highlight?
Yes, a couple more because, look, Russia, I want you to improve, and you did throw the game, so I think you deserve extra criticism here. So anyways, let's see, Russia moves to Bulgaria in 1904. I think this was actually agreed upon between the two of them.
That's right.
But I think this was a total trap on that Italy was setting a trap for Russia here. That, oh, look, I'm giving you centers. Instead of doing, I'll give you Budapest and I'll keep Bulgaria, I'll take Budapest and you take Bulgaria, which Italy is just setting a trap for Russia here that they're going to then be able to easily take Bulgaria and Romania.
I think you're right about that. And I think not only are you right about that, but Russia felt that way too. He said so at the time. And he was very suspicious, but he knew that was where he was going to get a center from because Italy refused to agree to give him Budapest, which is what he wanted.
And I think this is one of those cases where then you just support Budapest to hold, and you hope that Austria holds it.
Interesting. Maybe. In that case,
maybe that's incorrect as well. But
you would have declared war on Italy if you did that, and Austria also moves to Galicia here.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know necessarily, but I do think that there were ways that Russia could have gotten around this that didn't involve them walking right into a very obvious trap.
I wonder. I mean, I think there's just such a... Russia and Italy are nominally allied here, but I just think there's such a power disparity that I think...
Exactly.
I think Italy was, just kind of trying to tell Russia what to do at this point.
Oh, completely. But I think this is also one of those cases where now you realize you're in this trap. Maybe you actually start trying to work with me instead. I don't know.
I think that's a good point. I think maybe Russia should have done that.
There are considerations that could be made here, which I think, as a player who's almost dead, it's hard for me to defend myself. If Russia came to me with something, there's maybe a possibility that I would have gone for. I don't know. I probably wouldn't have, to be fair. But either way, I think that Russia shouldn't have walked into that trap. They could have even just held Romania, perhaps.
Let's talk about this for a minute. I think there are some actually pretty good move options here if you and Russia had decided to work together. If you had decided to trust each other a little bit and work together, Russia could have used Romania to
support Constantinople back to Bulgaria.
Well, I was going to say Constantinople could have gone out to the Aegean, and you could have gone Aegean to Bulgaria, and then you would have a build. And
perhaps, yeah, that's a good point.
And Russia could have taken Armenia back up to Sevastopol, and then you wouldn't be threatened by Russia.
Or Black Sea, perhaps.
Yeah, that's true.
You can say, oh well, I need, now that I'm betraying Italy, I need to have a fleet in Black Sea to support Romania.
Yeah, that's
honestly at that point I may have just had to go for that.
And
that's very true. That's a very devious, moving the fleet to Aegean Sea. I really like that. I don't think I would have thought of that.
I would have had the Aegean Sea. I would have moved to Aegean Sea, and maybe had you asked you to move Smyrna to Khan, supported by Ankara, which would have been a leap of faith on your part if I had asked you to do it. But that way you'd be able to build a fleet in Smyrna, and things start to look.
I think that getting that fleet in there actually starts to give Russia a path to a solo, in the sense that Russia really needs fleets in the Mediterranean. That's kind of the hardest thing for Russia.
Yeah.
Picking up the Sweden dot, you can build an extra fleet in St. Petersburg so that you can really dominate the north. That starts to really provide some potential solo opportunities to Russia if I had gone for that. So I think that's an excellent pitch.
Thanks. I pride myself on creativity under fire. In this situation, Russia was under fire, or should have felt he was under fire.
Yeah. In either way, regardless, walking into Bulgaria just caused incredible problems for both Russia and Italy.
It's
because Italy can claim that they're giving stuff to Russia while not really doing so.
Sometimes it's hard to resist the free lunch. a lot of players,
Very
if
true.
somebody offers them something and they're like, you could just take this. And of course, you won't be able to defend it, and I can take it back at any time. I can give with one hand and take away with the other. But you can take this right now. Look, it's a center. It'll be unoccupied.
And that's why it's a trap, but also a very obvious trap.
Obvious, but, the best traps do use bait.
Very true. But either way, I think this is one of those things that, is maybe hard to tell as a beginner, but is definitely a trap. And that can be something that Russia can keep in the back of their mind in the future when they play other games. I think pretty much the only other thing that I had a real problem with was the builds in winter of 04.
Oh yeah, I mean
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone who discusses this game will agree. Russia should have built fleet in St. Pete. The only thing they'll disagree about is North or South Coast, maybe.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there is a very solid argument to Russia have entirely avoided the North and paid much more attention to the South. So I think you can make an argument that Russia shouldn't have even been in Norway in the first place.
Oh.
And they shouldn't have had two fleets, maybe.
Huh.
But given that you have two fleets there, a third fleet makes a lot of sense. Because you can't do a lot with two fleets, but you can do a lot with three fleets. So yeah, I think here it was necessary to build a fleet in St. Petersburg. Whether that's North Coast or South Coast, I don't know if it necessarily matters too much. But yeah.
That's why I was saying it was something people would disagree about. People disagree about the things that are relatively small details quite a lot.
Yeah. Either way, I think the second mistake here is not building an army in Sevastopol.
I think that's a good point.
Even if you think that Italy's still on your side here after laying this huge trap, you at least need an army closer to where you are. Or as well, you could convoy that army into Ankara with support.
Yes.
There are lots of opportunities that an army in Sevastopol gives you that an army in Moscow does none of. And so I thought that was really the egregious one.
Yeah, I think he just succumbed to pressure from Italy there, oddly. He didn't succumb to pressure to build a fleet in St. Pete, but he succumbed to pressure to not build in Sevastopol.
Yeah, no, I can understand that as like, if I be nice to Italy, then Italy will be nice to me and let me keep Bulgaria. Maybe. Maybe that's kind of the calculus there, but either way, I think Russia made a mistake in these builds. And builds in Russia are hard. You have an extra 33% centers to think about when you're building.
More choices
than everyone else on the board. Well, and not only that, but you have a North Coast and a South Coast. Nobody else has a North Coast and a South Coast to build on.
Wow. Now that you mention it, that's a good point.
And you have to deal with multiple areas, like 3 different fronts in the board. So you're always limited on what to build, and you need to figure out where you'll need that build most. So I think that building as Russia is arguably one of the trickiest things in the game, but nevertheless, I think everyone can agree that these were a mistake.
Yeah, I think so. Because the units were built in such a way as to be useless to him.
Yeah.
He had to move them
precisely
for them to start being useful.
Yeah. So, anyways, it is up for debate what the actual optimal builds were in this case. But either way, it is not up for debate that these were not the optimal builds. Anyways, I think the final thing is that Russia got caught up in the emotions a bit too much. I can totally understand that, being likely a newer player and also playing in a game that feels like it's in for so much higher stakes because you're really putting a lot of effort into it, and in the press and in the recordings and everything. And so it's easy for emotions to run high. But when your emotions run high, it's much easier for you to be manipulated by players such as Russia or such as France. And so I think that letting themselves get so emotional about a stab that was ultimately for 2 centers was not optimal. If Russia lost this game as much as anyone, Russia would have remained in this draw and would have essentially, we would have had a 4-way draw where Russia was equal to France for.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not tournament play where the center count matters that much.
Yeah. Well, and I think many people argue that tournament play center count shouldn't matter. And the only reason it does is because sometimes tournaments have to cut games short and you can't actually determine if someone would have soloed or not.
And because, from what I've seen, people rarely solo in tournaments.
Yeah. Either way, point being,
most of the time in real life, but it's even less likely in tournaments.
Well, it's usually because players are a bit better, higher caliber on average.
That is true.
But either way, point being, in this game, we had decided that that draw size was what counted, and that everybody would be an equal player in that draw at the end. And so Russia on 2 centers, or 3, if I offered to give them Sevastopol back, doesn't matter, would have been an equal partner in that draw. And they essentially, because of either their emotions or a lack of caring at this point, they decided that they didn't want that. And that is something that's totally valid, and I think there are places where throwing a solo is legitimate. I've done it. I think most players have at some point in their diplomacy history thrown a solo. I think that here it was only based on emotion, and there were no strategic implications here, or even really, I don't think there was really much revenge going on, except for preventing Italy from getting into a draw where they would have been equal partners. And France hadn't been like this nice goody two-shoes that had saved Russia from someone, which is like, I can understand if 2 players are competing for a solo and one of them was way nicer of a player to you in that game, fine, throw the solo to the one that was nicer to you, if you're going to lose regardless. But I just didn't see a real reason for it here. And I think it was very much misplaced revenge. And maybe that's also because Russia took a nap. So I guess we can say the nap was the ultimate mistake.
Never sleep on the job. You can't afford to blink in this game.
So yeah, anyways, that's all of my thoughts.
I hope you've enjoyed these videos and this series as a whole. I know some people will be disappointed in the way it all came to an end, but I hope that the multiple perspectives will give it a lot of rewatch value and help each of the players who participated in it and those who watched it to improve their play in the future. If you liked this, I hope you'll like and subscribe and check out more of my diplomacy-related content. Until next time, Florida Man out.